Hi, friends. Welcome to Pockets Full of Quarters, the storytelling show about games. I'm your host, Jared Petty, and I'm happy to be joined today by a bona fide gaming aficionado, dare I say, subject matter expert.
Holy moly.
Yep, absolutely. Holy moly.
Holy hachi machi.
What is a pachi machi, my friend?
Hachi machi. It's like holy moly. I'm just very...
What is hachi machi? I do not recognize this.
I'm just flattered by all of your compliments.
Well, that's very kind of... These are merely statements of fact.
Oh,
Who
shucks.
are you, by the way?
My name is Marty Sliva.
Marty Sliva?
Yeah.
From where do you hail, my friend?
I am an executive editor at IGN.com.
Oh, that place.
Yes.
Excellent.
The Imagine Games Network, if you will.
And you're here today to talk about games that we are thankful for. In particular, one. This is a game that has a special place in your heart. I'd like to get right to what makes it special. Let's talk about ye old Mother 2.
Mother 2, or as many of you probably know, Earthbound.
Yeah.
When you asked me about being on the show, a couple games came to mind, and then very clearly when I thought of Earthbound, I'm like, oh, if I'm going to spend X amount of time serenading a game for having nothing but positive effects and memories on my life, it is 100% going to be Earthbound.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with the show, the idea is not necessarily this is about your favorite game even. It's about something wonderful that you're thankful for. So I'm going to ask you this, Marty, just jumping right into it. What is it about Earthbound that makes you feel thankful that it exists and thankful that it was part of your life?
There's a lot of elements of it, and one facet of it is I'm someone sort of obsessed with the idea of nostalgia, and this is one of those games that reminds me so very clearly of my childhood, and of which I find interesting because it is a game ultimately about that sort of period where childhood has to grow up a little bit.
Thematically, that's part of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And so I remember getting this game for Christmas of... I was a little bit late to the party. I think I got it Christmas 95, I want to say.
About how old were you?
I would have been 8 at the time.
Okay.
And I remember it was something like I had read about the game in magazines, and I'd done the scratch and sniff things. They had this really interesting campaign of scratch and sniff to where you could win the game. So it was immediately...
Yeah, these little tickets that were given out in magazines.
Yeah, and it was
smells
immediately
on them.
something weird because like I had played some RPGs before, but I'd never played something that was set in a town that looked like mine. And
What RPGs did you play prior to this?
I'd played a lot of Square's NES and then onto their Super Nintendo RPGs. I was still young, so a lot of the sort of deeper mechanics were a little bit above my head. But I always associated RPGs with knights and dragons and monsters.
Sure, the Dungeons and Dragons heritage.
Exactly,
Fair.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you played a kid with a baseball hat, and instead of a sword, you had a baseball bat, and instead of potions, you rummaged around in garbage cans for hamburgers that gave you health. And I remember seeing this game and being like, this is really interesting, asking for it for Christmas, getting it for Christmas, and then being floored that it came in this giant box that had a player's guide inside of it.
Yeah, it came with the player's guide.
Came with a player's guide, and it wasn't just like a player's guide of like, here are some tips on how to get through the game. The player's guide is like a work of art. It feels like a tourism guide.
Oh, that's cool.
The entire player's guide like unfolds like a tour guide because this whole game is about your journey from your little small town called Onnet through all of these different climates across the world. Across, I think Eagleton is the name of the continent you're on.
Kind of a pseudo America.
Yeah, it feels like a sort of, it taps into that like 50s Americana. Rock and roll, fast cars, a Beatles-esque band.
Through the lens of Japanese development in the early 1990s.
Yes, and so it is one of those fascinating takes where like it feels surreal. Like the game is like drenched in surrealism and magical realism. You fight the enemies you fight in the game are hippies and dogs and Ziggy Stardust inspired starmen and piles of puke and Salvador Dali paintings and angry parking meters.
Sounds like San Francisco.
It sounds a little bit like San Francisco. Yeah, it was so immediately just from a superficial level unlike anything I'd played before. Would you say the same?
Yeah, I would say the same. And I think that you talk about the surrealism of it. As a kid, did you draw any distinction between the surrealism being strange for strange's sake versus strange for some sort of thematic
Oh, no.
whole? Like, were you cognitive of a thematic center to all of this? Or did it all
as a
just seem
kid,
weird?
no. As an adult who's replayed the game dozens of times, yes, truly.
Did that change how you enjoyed it?
Oh yeah, my enjoyment of Earthbound has evolved with the way I think and sort of think and admire video games. And as I've gotten older and as I've grown to understand, subtext and how games are made more, looking back at Earthbound, like I thought it was just a cute mechanic that your character could get homesick, that you would need to either, call your mom or visit home and get, have her make your favorite meal, which is something you choose at the beginning of the game. You choose what your favorite meal is.
What'd you choose the first time?
I think it was pizza.
Good choice.
Yeah, it's a solid, but it's weird. Like, if I went home, I wouldn't ask my mom to make me pizza.
Well, it didn't ask what your mom's going to make. It asked what your favorite food was.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that maybe some of that is the cultural divide.
Sure.
I mean, and to this day in Japan, at least as when I lived there not too long ago, a lot of meals are still homemade for families. And very often, while there are foods you would generally only get in a restaurant, most things could be prepared in some way or another at home, and that happens a lot. So maybe that was how some of that came through.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I don't know. I'm just speculating.
I mean, the fact, like, I thought that was just like a cute thing as a kid, that the homesickness thing, or the fact that your dad deposits money into your account. Like, the more you fight, you call your dad. He's like, "Hey, I'm proud of you, son. I'd put some money in your account."
Yeah.
And
Your friendly but absent father.
Yeah, exactly. He's just always working. He's like, staying late at the office tonight.
That also predicted.
Yeah, that's very Japanese there.
No, I think we understand that pretty well in our context of life as well.
But as I've grown up, like the idea of homesickness as a mechanic in a games which are so often about going on journeys and leaving the familiar for the unfamiliar and exploring the dark corners of maps that haven't been filled in yet. The fact that it would tackle homesickness is so incredible to me, and the fact that a game in the mid 90s did that is incredible. And that's just one of the infinite things in Earthbound, that these tiny touches that are just so trope-defying that I didn't pick up on as a kid, but as I replayed as an adult, it's just such a magical thing.
Well, you said didn't pick up on it as a kid. Did you still enjoy it as a kid?
Oh, I loved it as a kid. I loved the characters. I loved the battle system, the music immediately. I fell in love with, and the fact that I loved that the game was ultimately about sort of finding these almost like the natural wonders of this world and tapping into their songs you find these wonders and you start to learn their songs, which in turn creates this like melody which you're trying to use to ultimately save the universe from this strange force that just seems to sort of be a manifestation of all of your fears and anxieties. It's kind of like Pennywise.
Yeah, it's kind of like Pennywise meets like a weird Freudian Tolkienian. It's like the Middle Earth creation story through the lens of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, you start to see what Gygas looks like, and then you're like, this is all very strange.
Yeah, and that sounds esoteric. If you've never experienced Earthbound, if you've never played it, it's kind of hard, I think, to convey how all the weird fits together so well.
Yeah,
it is kind of like The Matrix. You have to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
Or at least I lack the powers of articulation to express what brings it together. But it does feel like a series of weird and quirky incidents that at first seem almost random.
Yeah.
And then you start to see an order come out of it.
Sure.
The story threads unfold in different places. I mean, you'll just jump into the role of another character.
You'll be another character in a snowy setting, and you're like, who's this nerd with glasses in the snow? You're like, I don't know who this is. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I love this character.
Yeah, and Kid You was totally groovy with that.
Yeah.
But Adult You talk about a magic.
Yeah.
Going back to it, things change?
Yes. I started to... I remember as a kid... one of the things in the game is in the first city on it, there's a house you could buy. It's the only piece of property in the game you could buy. It costs a lot of money. And just like a weird dude outside, it's like, you don't want like this house. Like, this house is legit. You want this house. And I remember as a kid being like, all right, I'm going to save up. And later on in the game, I'm going to come back and I'm going to buy this house. You buy the house. and I spent all my money. You get inside the house, and the house is a wreck, and half of it's missing, and it just looks out into the ocean, and literally the house is like cut in half. There's no awesome weapon. There's no secret boss. There's no hidden treasure. It's just that. And as a kid, I remember being like, this is the worst. I can't do this. Like, I'm gonna save scrub. I'm gonna go back to my previous save. As an adult, I think that is absolutely genius. Like, I think it is so funny and so smart. And I think like an element like that, I think is so good. I think the fact that when you meet the Mr. Saturns, that they speak in like wingdings. I remember as a kid being like, why can't I understand them? And then as an adult, I'm like, they're giant noses. What does it matter if they speak as windings?
I just keep hearing Carrie Elwes in The Princess Bride going, get used to disappointment. Like, it's a lesson for life. It's like the end of an A.A. Milne book. You're just done for.
And then little elements like there's you meet this pair of inventors, the Apple Kid and the Orange Kid, and one of them is this handsome, charismatic, lives in a beautiful house, and one is just, he's got like stink lines coming out of him. He kind of lives in a trash pile. He's just a mess. He's got like little rats running around his house, and you have to choose which one you're going to invest money in. And like, I don't know, logic should tell you like, well, this guy's got his stuff together. Let's give him the money. And it's like, no, that guy's just going to use your money and give you nothing useful. Like, in order to progress with the game, you need to put your faith and realize that, like, don't judge this book by a cover. Like, if you need to get past that giant pencil statue, don't worry, he'll make you a giant pencil eraser.
And you can learn this from the player's guide.
You can learn this from the player's guide, which I just like that the game is like, there's a giant pencil statue in front of you. How are you going to get past it? And you're like, well, I'm going to use a giant eraser.
Exactly.
So of course.
This makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Most of the puzzles do make sense. Although there's that one door that you have to stand in front of for like 3 minutes. Do you remember that?
in the waterfall. In order to get into Master Belch's base.
That one's a little obdurate.
Yeah, that's a little Castlevania 2 right there.
But that's a tiny part of a vast,
absolutely
beautiful game, and actually, again, it fits tonally. It's quite congruent.
Totally, yeah. And I just loved the. It's in current RPG standards. It's a relatively light party. There's only 4 characters.
Yep.
They each have like a very specific role. One's all about magic. One's about sort of using gadgets. But I also love that there's these amazing moments like when you encounter the 4th party member, Pooh, who is sort of like a Shaolin monk in this floating kingdom. His I don't know what I would call it, like his bar mitzvah. What I don't know what the Shaolin version of a bar mitzvah is.
Whatever it is, that's what's going on, or something very much like it.
But it does this
His
thing,
coming of age.
His coming of age, where they do this really great fourth wall breaking thing, which again, we're in the 16-bit generation. Mm-hmm. We haven't gotten to, the PlayStations and Xboxes yet. Yeah. It does this thing where it takes away your senses. So it takes away your sight and the screen goes black. It takes away your sound and the sound goes away.
Yeah.
And it takes away your tongue and so the speech goes away.
Mm-hmm. And
it is just this amazing, interesting thing. And then you come back, of course, and you're finally done with your training and you're able to, because you now appreciate what these things are gifts and shouldn't be taken for granted.
And yet somehow in a 16-bit RPG featuring American school children, you're kind of in the middle of I have no mouth yet I must scream.
Exactly. This was the same game that earlier you were setting firecrackers off at like weird snakes in the middle of the forest.
It's a game about how big the world is, and about how big life is. Not just how it's a big planet, although that's part of it too, and not just about how getting older changes you. But I do think there's something to be said for the idea that it's a mystical game. It's a game about those things that exist outside the dimensions of sight and sound. It's a very Twilight Zone thing. It also reminds me a lot, I've shared this phrase in pockets before, of the Robert Heinlein line from Starship Troopers, where he's from the novel, where a character says something to the effect of, people who have never been to other planets don't really believe in them, not deep down where it counts.
Yeah.
And Earthbound's a great illustration of that part of reality, that maybe there's more to the world than what you've seen and experienced. And thematically that keeps coming up. And that the world changes you just as you change the world, because you're the hero of Earthbound and you're changing things, definitely, but you're changing too.
You're growing up, and characters you meet, characters who knew you as a child in the first town, will see you later on in the game and be like, oh, you've changed, man. Like, you've changed. And the world, I don't know, it's kind of funny because, like, a character is in that transformative age, which is sort of like the age, I think, my appreciation for the game lasted throughout those transformative years. But it is the strange surrealism of all of the sights and sounds that Ness and his friends experience. When you think about your own childhood, some of the things you think about, you're like, man, how do all of these fit together? How do all these strange people and places and things and events, like, they all sound so, like, tall-tale-y. They all sound like a myth. But when stitched together, it's almost like Big Fish. You're like, that's my life. Like, that was what it is.
You put it together.
Yeah.
Have you had moments in your life that Earthbound reminds you of? I mean, do you
Yeah, I would say homesickness. I would say the awe of getting to Foreside for the first time, which is sort of it's the first big city you get to in the game. It's New York City, and I love the fact that there is a you go into the back of a bar in Foreside and you futz with something, and then you are transported to a nighttime neon version called Moonside. And to me, I'm just like, as an adult, I'm like, yeah, that's what most cities are like to me. Most cities have a day and a night. And like San Francisco during the day is very different than San Francisco at night.
Expound.
San Francisco during the day is the neighborhood I live in particular are shops and cafes, and you see families with kids and strollers and dogs and, you know, people in suits, and, you know, it's sort of people going about their normal everyday. And then at night, I live in a street just packed with bars and clubs, and it's just terrifying sensory overload. A terrifying sensory overload that I love, but it is very much a like, oh, okay, it's Moonside now. It's no longer Foreside.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. I don't know. I love that. I think any big city, like Tokyo during the day, feels very different than Tokyo at night. New York during the day feels very different than New York at night. And I think that's it expresses it in sort of through a magical realism lens, but through, I think, a really effective and evocative one. You
mentioned magical realism. Yeah. Is this can you think of an earlier instance of magical realism in games?
Yeesh.
There's some stuff in computer gaming, I think, that falls down that line, but I wondered if you'd encountered anything in console gaming before this.
No. Like, there's very much fantasy things, but I wouldn't say any of the Square RPGs do that. You could make an argument that Mario at its core is strange magical realism, especially when you go into some of the lore of, like, all of the blocks are citizens of the Mushroom Kingdom.
Every time you break a brick, you're murdering someone.
Yeah. Like, or the fact, like, Mario 3 is all a stage play.
Mario 3 is a stage play. I love.
I don't even think that's a theory. I just think that's
and Super Mario World, when they're all literally doing the curtain call. That's just the best. You played I Want to Be the Guy.
Yeah.
Right? Did you finish it?
I didn't know.
So I Want to Be the Guy, renowned for its terrible difficulty and extraordinary and purposeful difficulty, which is part of what makes the game beautiful. You know, the classic example is you run underneath an apple and it falls and kills you. You jump over the apple, it falls up and kills you. But in the credits to that, there's a sort of a tribute to the Super Mario World and Mega Man kind of endings where you're going along and marching and but there's an apple that can fall on you and kill you.
I love that. In the end credits. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
That moment, that game has, there's that beautiful moment where you've got Dracula from Symphony and he's doing the, what is a man? But enough, have at you. And he tosses the wine glass. Well, it's a cutscene and but if you don't move, the wine glass falls on your head and kills you.
I love that.
That taught me a lot about life.
Yeah.
Okay. So
if you don't move, the wine glass might kill you.
Back to Earthbound.
Yeah.
That's you mentioned much earlier, and I want to ask you about this a little bit about this. The combat system.
Yeah.
You actually called that out.
Yeah.
What was it about the combat system you liked?
It was very simple, and it was very much inspired by the Dragon Quest combat system, where you don't see your characters. You sort of enter this psychedelic planescape, and you see the enemies in front of you. One thing it did there was, when you encounter an enemy out in the wild, it's just like a couple sprites. Like, it's not very impressive looking. The enemy design, the character design in battle is wonderful. From just standard, scrub mobs of enemies to what the insane bosses look like, whether they're psychic ants or like kung fu cops or giant piles of puke or a pair of dragons or robots or aliens, the art immediately stood out. And then I really loved the sort of the quips the game would have. Like, instead of it saying you missed your attack, it would be like, the crow looked into your eyes and knew what you were going to do beforehand. It dodged your attack. And so it's like these like little poems inside of there.
Yeah.
Sometimes you would get a side character for a little bit that would be like your dog. And you assume your dog is going to be like a great companion, but he's just a coward. And it's like the dog hid behind, like it gets to the dog's turn and it said the dog hid behind you because it doesn't want any part of this.
That's
like really beautiful.
That's where I there are other things to say about the combat, but I must confess that was a bit of a leading question. I was hoping you'd mention that.
Yeah.
The attention to seemingly superfluous whimsy.
Yep.
In Earthbound. What's that all about?
You know what? Again, it's a weird thing to know. Like, I imagine that dialogue-wise, this was there in the Japanese version, because this game is like really incredibly localized, which is, I think, one of the earlier examples of a game that just like nailed the localization really well. But it's just, I don't know why the whimsy is there, but it works in so many interesting ways. Like, you can get in the first half of the game, you can get a party member that's just a teddy bear that you have with you, and the teddy bear can't attack, but the enemies will think it's one of your party members, and so it has X amount of HP that instead of attacking you, they'll attack the teddy bear, and then eventually they're like, they ripped it to shreds, Teddy is gone, and I'm like, oh, now I feel like after that happened the first time, I'm like, well, I'm not going to buy another one of these because like I feel bad for it. And I'm like, why do I feel bad for the teddy bear and not for like the Paula, the girl in my party who's like also getting attacked by these ravens and cultists who are obsessed with the color purple? Yeah, it makes you think about things in really like, I don't know, strange, interesting ways. Like it does weird things, but I'm like, all right, yeah, I'm on board. I'm on board with your brand of
whimsy.
Purposeful whimsy that I buy into so quickly every time I play the game.
Is it off-putting?
I don't think it's off-putting at all.
Yeah,
No. Yeah, I think and I think it's great that the game, by going on this journey through all the various towns in the world, you never know what's around the next corner. Like, you go from a town filled with like skateboard punks and corrupt cops to a cult that is a carpentry cult obsessed with painting things blue and purple to a town infected by zombies to this day and night giant city Forside to a desert where there's a mine guarded by 5 ancient moles to you get to this dinosaur world where your characters turn into little sprites. They're like just 2 pixels on the screen because the camera zoomed out so big to show you that. Just a beautiful, weird setting after setting.
How's Earthbound made you a better person?
I think Earthbound has made me a better person because I've somehow in my life, some of the people I've grown to know and hold dear share the same affinity for me. We didn't grow up together, and we met through circumstances like work, but like meeting you and talking to Earthbound, or meeting Andrew Goldfarb and talking to Earthbound, or Jose Ortero or Jeremy Parrish, all these people who in my career I've grown to admire, learn from, and befriend. Like, we all shared, we have very different tastes in games, but Earthbound is this one thing we all share. And I think it's because we all played it at that time in our life where it was something so different and so unique that it just hit us.
I heard Ray Barnholt speak to something like this similar once, but when I moved to Japan, I was still blown away by it, even though I kind of expected some of it. Walking into a culture from the other side of the world that I'd never visited before, and discovering that I had childhood and adolescent touchstones that I shared with my students who had grown up on the other side of the planet, that these video game moments were the same for us.
Yeah.
That down to blowing on the cartridge and sitting on the floor in front of the old CRT early in the morning, one of the happiest moments of my adult life was just geeking out with a lady in a Sony factory about Suikoden 2.
Yeah.
As 3 other students looked on in bemusement.
Yeah.
As we both discovered that we had fallen down the Suikoden hole together.
Love.
Yeah, you know, it's just very, very funny. And being like, I don't speak the same language as you. I grew up in a culture that in many ways could not be more different.
Sure,
in its expectations and its construction, and its government and its educational system, and yet I feel like I grew up next door to you. That's strange. And so the fact that you had that through Earthbound with so many people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also it represents how far gaming as a whole in terms of like pop culture has come, that I was like the only person I knew as a kid in my small town in Wisconsin who'd played Earthbound. And so I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. But now I've met all these people, and I'm like, oh, a bunch of us were those kids in that small town who played it and didn't have anyone to talk about it with. And now there was an Earthbound convention in Arizona last year that's just about Earthbound. If you go to Green Apple Books, which is this incredible bookstore in San Francisco, there's a giant wall dedicated to video game books, and several shelves of it are books about Earthbound, whether it's books about Earthbound or art or fan gamer stuff. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, I thought I was the only one, and I feel like a million kids thought they were the only one. And it's just one of those examples of like, no, you're not. And the internet sort of made that to where it's so easy to realize you're not the only one because of the internet now. Because and Earthbound was admittedly like Starman.net was one of the first major fan sites I remember that like really was just like so singularly championing one thing. But yeah, I don't know. It's just to me indicative of that sort of shared experience that we didn't realize we were having back then.
I love that.
Yeah.
If you ever make a video game, what are you going to steal from Earthbound?
If I ever made an RPG, I would love to steal the sort of creative writing aspect of like describing what's happening. It didn't feel like, it felt like the difference between a good dungeon master who's like telling the story and making it exciting, and one who's just like, you rolled for 5 damage, which is what most RPGs, kind of feel like. Like Earthbound, like almost like it has this like energy and pace and like complete sense of the unexpected that I really appreciate, and I feel like that's one thing I would take from it.
That's really cool. You haven't talked much about the ending.
Yeah,
I'm really curious. Earthbound's ending is befitting its structure, but also very different.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the way that Earthbound comes together in its climax?
How far into the end? Like,
I'll let you answer that as you see fit.
So
what's the ending to Earthbound to you? I guess that'd be
the thing that amazes me is so through the game, Paula, one of your party members, she has an ability called Pray, where she prays, and sometimes it gives you a like, it'll heal you a little bit. It's a random thing. You don't really know what it's going to do. I never used it in the game because I was like, well, she has weapons and she has.
It feels like a kind of quirky mechanic that seems kind of like almost like a throwaway.
I thought, because it was, to me, it was Prey, because she's the first party member you get after Ness, and to me it was just one of those funny things like, oh, I bought this house and there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
In the end, you are facing the final boss, Gygas, after you've transformed yourself into robots and sent yourself back in time on what felt like a suicide mission.
It gets real serious here for a bit.
It gets real weird, real serious. And you realize that you can't your baseball bats and your magic and your swords and your all-powerful bottle rockets do nothing. Like this, you can't beat Gygas. Gygas was here long before you existed, and Gygas will be here long after you exist. The only thing you can do is pray. While he's just pummeling your team, you can pray. And as you're praying, your prayers are heard by the characters whose lives that you've bettered throughout the game. And you start seeing these little cutscenes of characters you've encountered along the way, and through the quest, you've helped them a little bit, and you've taught them, and they've taught you. And they hear your prayers, and they answer your prayers with prayers of their own. And so as someone who's not, I don't consider myself religious, but I think it's a powerfully moving moment and an incredibly risky design decision that I think thematically really pays off, that if this is a game about a journey of you discovering who you are by being a good person and helping the people you meet along the way and them informing you who you are, that being the payoff of the game and the only way to complete it, I think is beautiful.
What did you think of, you mentioned entering in your favorite food
Yeah.
at the beginning. You also enter in the name of the person playing the game, which is distinct from the name of your character.
Sure. Yeah, it's who's playing the game, and you assume it's just to clarify save files, so that you and your brother and your sister can play on 3 different save files.
Except it's not.
It's not.
Because at that ending also, as all the entreatments for prayer come out, it asks you, who's playing the game, to pray for them.
Yeah.
Did you say a prayer for them?
I remember being like, again, this was fourth wall breaking stuff before I knew what that meant. And so I did feel like as a kid, I closed my eyes for a little bit and was like, I hope I get through this. And it happens. And it's because it really does feel like, this game is, Itoi was the lead developer and writer on it, and he was a Japanese novelist.
Yeah, copywriter and novelist.
Yeah,
they did all kinds of things.
And this just felt like such a incredibly warm, genuine, and earnest thing to put in the game, and I almost felt like it was his way of like thanking you. Like in the same way that the Mario characters might like wave at you at the end of a game, like this was his way of incorporating it into that really emotional moment at the end. And then it follows up with what I think is really beautiful of you sort of backtracking your way through the world and saying goodbye to these friends you made, and you might not ever see, the Shaolin monk, or you might not ever see the inventor from Winters again. You might not ever see Paula again. But it doesn't in any way sort of take away what happened before it, because you'll always have that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's something I can be thankful for.
Yeah, and and Earthbound's definitely a game that whenever it gets re-released in any iteration, I always go back and replay it, and I always get excited for folks who haven't played it, because I think it is a game that is every bit as beautiful and memorable and impacting and entertaining in 2017 as it was in the mid-90s.
Yeah, analogy is always suspect, but I feel like Earthbound is video gaming's Wizard of Oz.
Beautiful. Yeah. Completely agree.
So,
yeah.
Thanks for sharing this, Marty.
I know. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really thrilled to have you here. And folks, if you want to write to us and talk about the games that you love, the address is mail@pocketsfullofsoup.com. That's mail@pocketsfullofsoup.com. We also want to thank our Patreon producers, Nick Rie and Robert Nieder, whose generous support makes this show possible. And we'd also like to thank our friend Robbie Suave, who wrote the theme song. So
beautiful.
Thank you, Robbie. Folks, it's good to play games. Go play some. Thanks, Marty.
Welcome.